Once upon a time, many years ago, there lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and 2 children in the deep forest. They were beginning to feel strained. His meager earnings were hardly enough to buy enough food for the 4 of them. What little they grew in their garden was hardly edible, probably because they were carrots, and his wife didn't know that it's the orange part you eat, not the greens. Occasionally, the neighbor across the creek would bring over some bread she'd just baked, or some cheese, but mostly they struggled. The 2 children of this unfortunate couple were a boy named Hansel and a little girl just younger than him named Gretel. Each night they cowered beneath the covers, listening as their mother complained to their father, the poor woodcutter, about how she could have been rich and lived in a palace, but instead she'd married him. She said there wasn't enough food for their family. If they didn't have any children, they'd be fine. But with those 2 extra bowls at the table, there was just never enough to go around. And that is how her plan began to form. Hansel and Gretel couldn't believe it the night the wife told their father, the poor woodcutter, what they would do. The wife told him they would announce to the children the next day that the whole family would go into the deep dark forest together because it was time for the children to learn the family trade. They would travel deep into the deep dark forest, past the boundary, far from home, beyond the road's ending. They would set up camp, put the children to bed, and leave them there in the night. The poor woodcutter cried out, which fortunately covered the children's horrified gasps. The wife claimed it wasn't as bad as it sounded. Who knew? Perhaps 15 or 20 years down the road they'd meet them again, happy and grateful for their parents' early emancipation. The children were appalled, but even more shocking was the shuddering agreement of their father, the poor woodcutter. He didn't like the idea, but felt he had no choice. His wife's mind was completely made up. The children woke with fear the way you do after a nightmare, where your heart feels tight in your chest but relaxes as you look around the room, except that a glance reminded them of the reality of last night's conversation and that the nightmare was only just beginning. "Children," called the mother, "get your shoes on. You're going with your father, the poor woodcutter, today. It's time you learned a bit of tradecraft." Hansel held his sister's trembling hand and whispered in her ear, "Don't worry, Gretel, I have a plan." He put on his boots and headed out the door, out toward the neighbor. But before he could take 2 steps more, his mother caught him. "Hamstead, where are you going?" She gripped the boy by his arm. He looked confused. "Mother, my name is Hansel," he corrected her plaintively. She rolled her eyes and agreed. Yes, Hansel then. Where are you going?" "Across the creek to get some bread. I can smell that the neighbor is baking today, and I thought I'd ask if we might take some with us while we go with our father, the poor woodcutter, deep into the forest to hunt trees." He held his eyebrows high to ensure the mother wouldn't detect the concealed truth of his business across the creek. But the mother answered too quickly. "We've already a crust of bread I found beneath the chair in the corner. I've packed it in a handkerchief with 2 bunches of carrots for your supper already." The mother held out a fist from which dangled the handkerchief with a moldy bit of bread and some wilted green carrot tops tucked limply beside it. "Oh," said the boy, and he took the handkerchief from her. "Now put it into your coat pocket and let us away. Your father, the poor woodcutter, says we're already late." The children climbed into the back of the ox cart, and the family started off up the narrow trail into the deep forest. Gretel gazed back as the cottage roof disappeared from view, knowing it was the last she'd ever see of home. Hansel put his arm around her and tried to comfort her, even though he wasn't sure if he'd ever see home again either. They went along up the trail till they came to a clearing and a lovely green meadow. The mother exclaimed at how lovely the wildflowers looked and said she fancied a ride across them. So with that, their father, the poor woodcutter, steered the old ox off the trail and over the soft wild flowers. At the other end was the deeper and darker forest where no one ever went. Gretel shuddered at the terrible things that might live there. The sun and the sky disappeared as they threaded their way beneath the ancient towering trees. Hansel worried he wouldn't be able to find the right direction home without the sun to guide him. "Father, the poor wood—" But Gretel pulled his coat and shook her head. Father, I mean, perhaps we should stop here and chop these trees. They look very clean already. Think of how much easier they may be to wash." The cart slowed slightly as their father raised an eyebrow over whether cleaning the wood might be a reason people weren't interested in buying from him. But the wife snapped a switch over the ox's tail and the cart jolted forward. "We've much better wood to cut further along," exclaimed the wife with a meaning look at their father, the poor woodcutter. The cart rocked back and forth over roots and rocks. Hansel became annoyingly aware of the hard, stale crust of bread in his pocket as it scratched his tummy with each bump. He opened his coat and saw the crumbled bread covering his thread-worn shirt. He was about to brush the crumbs away when an idea came to mind. "What if," he thought quietly to himself, "I cast a single crumb from the cart every few moments as we cross deeper and deeper into the deeper, darker forest? The trail will be lit by moonlight, and we'll be able to find our way back home." He smiled as he released his first crumb. He cast one, then two, then another and another, casually, every few moments, so that no one would notice. But Gretel noticed. She gave him a wondering look as he tossed another thin crumb down from the cart. "What are you doing, Hansel?" she whispered. He put his head close to hers and whispered back as quietly as snowfall, "I'm leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. When they leave us, we can follow the trail and find our way back home." Gretel was amazed at her brother's clever plan. She began to feel much better about this whole journey and worried less and less about the things that might lurk in the deeper, darker forest, like bears and owls and witches and things. "Mother," she asked, "I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat?" "I found a crust of bread you must have left on the floor, and there's some fresh carrots I found yesterday all wrapped up in your father, the poor woodcutter's handkerchief, inside Hamstead's coat." The father muttered something under his breath. "What?" snapped the mother. "It's Hansel," said her brother. "Speak correctly, dearie. Your brother's not an it." "No, mother, it was me," said the boy. "Hansel. My name is Hansel." "Yes, well, get out the things we packed and make camp," said the mother, glaring at their father, the poor woodcutter, who had about had enough of this. He stopped for a moment, but the sharp look from his wife reminded him how unpleasant his life could become. He closed his mouth and slid from the cart to unpack the things. "You only left the carrots here for your sister," the mother frowned at Hansel and took the wilted, weedy tops from him, holding them out to the girl. "Here, it's only the carrots that's left." Gretel took the wilted greens. Then the mother and their father, they were going to sleep in the ox cart while the children slept in the only bedroll on the ground. Gretel protested, but the mother explained that the forest floor was much softer than the hard wooden cart, and the children would rest easier on the deeper, darker forest floor. Before too long, Gretel was asleep. Even though Hansel tried only to pretend he was asleep, watching the ox cart through one half-opened eye without dozing proved impossible. A few hours later, something from deep within the deeper, darker forest made a noise that woke both children with a start. They got up from the ground and looked around in the dark. Their parents, the ox, and the cart were long gone. In the soft, mulchy floor of the deeper, darker forest, the cart left no tracks. There was no way of knowing from which way they'd come. Panic filled their hearts for a moment, but Hansel remembered his furtive trail of breadcrumbs and calmed his sister. "All we have to do is find the first crumb, and then the next, and follow them one by one back home," he said. "It will be easy. We just have to find the first one." But the first breadcrumb was nowhere to be found, for the forest is filled with hungry creatures like squirrels, mice, and birds. Not to mention the group of lost pilgrims who at the sight of the trail let out a hearty, "Hosanna! 'Tis manna from the Lord!" And they scurried about, filling their skirts and waistcoat pockets, preaching at one another how the children of Israel only gathered according to their needs, yet when they'd finished, not a crumb remained. So, whether by small animals or big fat men with buckles on their hats, the trail of breadcrumbs was gone. Hansel and Gretel stood in the deepest, darkest part of the forest, lost, scared, and unfortunately, not quite completely alone. If you'd like to hear the rest of the story, please subscribe to our channel. And if you'd like to support us, there's a Redbubble link to buy some stickers right there in the description. You can follow us on Facebook so that you can make comments. But this is the beginning of our story of Hansel and Gretel and whoever they may meet after this. Thanks for watching.